I stopped putting in effort, thinking he'd never leave, but now he decided to end things. Hello, Reddit. I genuinely never thought I'd find myself writing one of these posts. I know a lot of people say that all the time, but I'm being honest here. I'm using a throwaway account because I don't want this linked to my main account. I feel like my world is crumbling, and I desperately need to share my story. It's a long one, and if you've got the patience, I could really use your advice and support. So, let me start from the beginning just so you all understand. My name is Jenna, and I've been married to David for 5 years. We met in college and hit it off instantly. And when I say instantly, I truly mean it. From the moment we met, it felt like we had known each other forever. We understood each other on a level that felt almost supernatural. Honestly, we were like soulmates. We got married right after graduation because from the moment we met, we knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives with each other. For the first few years, things were great. We were both ambitious, working hard, and enjoying our lives together. David has always been the kind of guy who is there for me. He's supportive, loving, and goes the extra mile for our relationship and marriage. Only now do I fully appreciate how much he invested in us. David has always been the one to plan date nights, outings, and weekend getaways. You name it, and David was the one who took charge. I never really put in the same effort. If David didn't do it, I wouldn't. As time went on, life got busier. We both got caught up in our careers and the responsibilities that came with them. David came from a wealthy family, and it seemed like everything was handed to him effortlessly. This made me feel like I had to work extra hard to catch up and be on the same level. I threw myself into my career, pushing myself to achieve and succeed. I thought that if I could just work harder, I would catch up to David and everything would fall into place. We bought a house, started thinking about starting a family, and the everyday grind took over. My focus shifted almost entirely to my career and the new responsibilities that came with it. In the midst of all this, I neglected our relationship. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was taking David for granted. I let our connection slide, believing that our love was strong enough to endure without constant effort. But now, looking back, I see how wrong I was. I had this naive belief that David would always be there, that our bond was unbreakable and unshakable. As I became more absorbed in my own world, I neglected the most important person in my life. It wasn't until recently that I realized just how much I'd let our relationship deteriorate. David had always been the one who made things special and kept the spark alive, while I just coasted along. I stopped putting in any effort. I wouldn't even bother attending date nights, even after David had gone through all the trouble of planning them. I'd ignore reminders about our plans, and fell into a routine where David felt more like a roommate than a partner. I thought he'd always be there, that he would never leave, no matter how little I did to maintain our relationship. I assumed that because he was so patient and understanding, he'd never walk away. I just couldn't imagine my life without David, so I took his presence for granted. One of the biggest examples of my neglect was when I completely forgot our anniversary last year. David had planned a special dinner at our favorite restaurant, and I was so wrapped up in a work project that I didn't even remember until the next morning. When I finally realized, I scrambled to make it up to him with a hastily planned dinner, but it felt insincere, even to me. I think that was when David started to feel like I no longer valued our time together. And then there were also countless times when David would come home from work, visibly stressed or upset, and instead of being there for him, I'd brush it off because I was too absorbed in my own issues. I remember one particular evening when David wanted to talk about a difficult situation at work. I was too preoccupied with my own career problems to listen, so I told him I was too tired to talk and suggested he deal with it on his own. In doing so, I dismissed him in a very cruel and rude way. David also had a tradition of planning weekend getaways for us to reconnect and unwind. But over time, I started making excuses not to go. Too much work, feeling too tired, or just wanting to stay home and catch up on my hobbies. My pattern of skipping out on our planned time together grew worse, and it started extending to date nights and movie nights. I didn't provide much support for his career goals either. When David started a new project at work that required long hours and extra effort, I didn't make any effort to support him. Instead of being understanding or offering help around the house, I was often frustrated by his absence and complained about how it affected my own schedule. I didn't consider how much he was sacrificing for his career and our future. I also ignored his efforts in our relationship. David was always the one who planned romantic gestures, like surprise dates or thoughtful gifts. But as time went on, I stopped reciprocating and didn't even make an effort to show appreciation. On several occasions, David would go out of his way to do something special for me, and I'd barely acknowledge it or return the gesture. David tried to talk to me about it a few times. He would mention how he felt neglected or how he missed the way things used to be. But honestly, I was so selfishly wrapped up in my own world that I didn't really listen. I'd brush off his concerns with a quick apology and then return to my busy schedule, believing that he would get over it. Looking back, I see now how deeply I hurt David and how my lack of effort contributed to the downfall of our relationship. I took his love and commitment for granted, and now I'm facing the consequences of my actions. It hurts extra hard because David always went the extra mile for me, always did everything with me in mind, and was consistently there for me. He was the kind of partner who supported my dreams and made every effort to ensure that I felt valued and loved. If only I had been there for David, half as much as he had been there for me, maybe things wouldn't have deteriorated to this point. David always supported my career goals, never once begrudging me the long hours I put in or the stress that came with it. Whenever I needed to vent about work frustrations, he was there to listen patiently and offer comforting words. He kept up with our weekend plans, even when I neglected them or made excuses to stay home. Every special occasion, from anniversaries to birthdays, David never forgot to celebrate. He always put in the effort to make each moment memorable, regardless of how inattentive or dismissive I was. Most people would have gotten tired and given up after repeatedly seeing how uninterested and uninvolved I was. But David didn't stop. He continued to do everything and be everything I needed, even when it was clear I wasn't reciprocating. His unwavering dedication was a testament to how much he cared, but I took that for granted. David didn't mind that I was neglecting him, didn't let it deter him from his role as a supportive and loving husband. He didn't let my disinterest or the fact that I often dismissed his feelings and needs stop him from trying to make our relationship work. He kept planning surprises, organizing getaways, and being my rock, despite how I treated him. He persisted in doing everything he could to maintain the spark in our relationship, all the while being met with my indifference. Now, looking back, I see just how much I've lost. David's selflessness and commitment showed me how deeply he cared, and it's devastating to realize that I didn't appreciate it enough when I had the chance. Things started to change more drastically around the time we celebrated our 5th anniversary. I had hoped that maybe a special trip or a romantic dinner would help us reconnect, but I was so caught up in work that I barely planned anything. I left everything to David, who did his best to make the day special. He arranged a beautiful dinner, booked a weekend getaway, and even took the time to write me a heartfelt letter expressing his love and commitment to our relationship. But despite all his efforts, I was too wrapped up in my own world to reciprocate. When the day finally came, I was called into work at the last minute. Instead of finding a way to prioritize our anniversary, I went to work, thinking I could make it up to him later. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, that David would understand. But when I called him to let him know, I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Still, I didn't grasp the full weight of what I was doing. I missed the dinner, the getaway, and every opportunity that day to show David how much he meant to me. Now that I think about it, that moment marked a significant turning point in our relationship. It was the first time I truly saw the hurt I was causing David, but even then, I didn't fully acknowledge it. I told myself that things would get better on their own, that David would bounce back as he always did. I didn't realize that he was slowly losing hope. After that anniversary, David's frustration began to show more clearly. He became more distant. His warm smiles and affectionate gestures began to grow fewer and farther between. Instead of spending weekends planning activities for us, as he usually did, he began filling his time with errands, solo outings, and work. It wasn't like him to be so disconnected, and although I noticed the change, I chose to ignore it. I thought that eventually things would fall back into place, that our love was strong enough to survive without any real effort on my part. But last month, everything came to a head. David came home one evening, looking more serious than I had ever seen him. He sat me down, and with a calm but firm voice, he told me he couldn't do it anymore. He said he felt like he was in a relationship with someone who didn't care about him, who was more of a roommate than a partner. He admitted he was tired of being the only one making an effort, of feeling like he was the only one who wanted to keep our relationship alive. Hearing those words broke something inside me. I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but I couldn't deny the truth in what he was saying. I knew I had neglected him, taken him for granted, and assumed he would always be there no matter how little I contributed to our relationship. I thought I could get away with doing the bare minimum because I was confident in his love for me. But now that I was faced with the reality that he was considering leaving, I realized how much I had misjudged the situation. David told me he needed time to think about what he wanted, but he made it clear that he was seriously considering ending things. Since that conversation, our relationship has been in limbo. David packed a bag and has been staying at his brother's place and left me alone in the house. It no longer feels like our home. The silence is deafening. I've spent countless nights lying awake, trying to figure out how to fix things, but it feels like it might be too late. I've been reflecting on how I let our relationship deteriorate, and the guilt is crushing. I've tried reaching out to David, asking if we can talk, if there's anything I can do to make it right, but every time, he's distant and unresponsive, which only deepens my fear that I've lost him for good. Part of me feels like David is overreacting, that maybe he's just tired and needs some space, but deep down, I know he also has a valid point. I let things slide for so long that it's no wonder he's reached his breaking point. I want to believe that I can change, that I can become the partner he needs, but I'm at a loss for how to convince him of that, if he's not even willing to talk to me. How do you prove you've changed when the other person has already started to walk away? The possibility of losing the most important person in my life is terrifying. I've made so many mistakes, and I'm not asking for sympathy. I just want advice from anyone who has been through something similar. Is there any way to repair a relationship after such a significant breakdown? Or is it too late once someone has decided to leave? How do I show David that I'm willing to put in the effort this time? And how do I cope with the fear of losing him, knowing that it's my fault? The weight of knowing that I had someone who went above and beyond for me, only for me to fail to reciprocate, is almost too much to bear. David gave everything he had, and I let it slip through my fingers. If you've ever been in a situation where you realized too late that you were taking someone for granted, how did you handle it? How did you rebuild the trust and connection that had been lost? Any wisdom or guidance would be deeply appreciated as I'm struggling to find a way forward. Update.
Hey Reddit.
First off, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who offered advice, shared their stories, and even to those who called me out. Your support and tough love really helped me see things from a different perspective. When I first posted, I was in a state of denial, and I didn't fully realize the extent of my mistakes. But hearing from so many of you, especially those who have been in similar situations, made me feel less alone and more accountable for my actions. So here's an update. A lot of you suggested that I should avoid saying that David was overreacting, and I wish I had taken that advice to heart. I made the mistake of bringing that up during one of our rare conversations, and it completely backfired. David had just started to open up a little, and when I mentioned that I thought he might be overreacting, he got really angry. He completely shut down after that, and I haven't been able to reach him since. I tried calling and texting, but he wouldn't respond. A few hours later, he sent me a message that was more painful to read than anything I could have imagined. It was a list of incidents, things I had done over the years that made him feel undervalued and unimportant. Reading through it was like a gut punch because I could see, in black and white, just how much I had hurt him. David mentioned how I would often skip family gatherings. He said that he would invite me to his family's events or suggest visiting his friends for the weekend, but I would consistently decline. I always had an excuse: work, needing rest, or just not feeling up to it. Over time, his family started to notice my absence and began to ask if everything was okay between us. David said it put him in a really uncomfortable position because he had to keep making excuses for me, covering up for what was really just a lack of interest in spending time with his loved ones. He also pointed out how I ignored his achievements. David has always been my biggest supporter. Every time I got a promotion or reached a milestone, he would celebrate it like it was his own. But when he got a significant promotion at work, I barely acknowledged it. I gave him a quick congratulations and then moved on, not even taking the time to ask him what the promotion meant to him or to celebrate it properly. David said that even our friends and colleagues noticed this imbalance, how he would always talk about my successes, but when it was his turn, I didn't seem to care. No. One of the most painful things he mentioned was how I forgot his birthday one year. He had planned a small dinner with close friends and expected me to help with the preparations. But not only did I forget the date, when I finally remembered, I didn't make any effort to make it up to him. Our friends noticed my lack of involvement and even began to wonder if there were problems in our marriage. I didn't realize how much that had hurt him until he brought it up in his message. David also talked about how I constantly turned down his friends. He said that he would often try to include me in activities with his friends, like game nights or double dates. But I would frequently turn down these invitations, preferring to stay home or focus on work. Over time, his friends started noticing my absence and began asking why I never joined them. This put David in the awkward position of having to explain my constant rejections, which he said made him feel even more isolated. Another issue he brought up was my tendency to neglect important conversations. David said that on several occasions he tried to have serious discussions with me about our future, including starting a family or making long-term plans. But each time I would either brush off the conversation, change the subject, or show little interest in planning our life together. He said this made him feel like I didn't care about our future, and that even his closest friends started to notice his growing frustration. David also mentioned how I overlooked his health. He went through a period where he was under a lot of stress at work, and it started to affect his health. He began experiencing frequent headaches and fatigue. When he mentioned this to me, I showed little concern. I just told him to take a day off without really engaging or offering support. David said his coworkers noticed how much he was struggling and even suggested he see a doctor, but I remained largely indifferent. This, he said, further drove home the point that I wasn't paying attention to him. He also brought up how I would publicly undermine him. David said that during social events, I would sometimes make dismissive comments about him in front of our friends, joking about his hobbies or how much time he spent on certain tasks. He said that while I might have thought I was just being playful, he felt humiliated and unsupported. Our friends began to pick up on the tension and even asked him privately if everything was okay between us. One of the last things he mentioned was how I failed to participate in household decisions. David said that we had agreed early on to share responsibilities around the house, from finances to home maintenance. But over time, I started leaving all the decisions to him and showed little interest in participating. Whether it was choosing new furniture or managing our budget, David said he always found himself making decisions alone. Even when he asked for my input, I would dismiss him, which made him feel incredibly frustrated and alone in what is supposed to be a partnership. After laying all of this out, David said that if I still thought he was overreacting, he could go on because there were so many more examples of how I had made him feel unimportant and unloved. He said that it's exhausting to prioritize someone who doesn't prioritize you, and reading those words, I realized just how much I had taken him for granted. I'm at a loss now. I don't know how to make things right. I'm scared that I've lost the most important person in my life because I was too focused on myself to see what was happening right in front of me. I'm trying to figure out how to show David that I understand the depth of my mistakes and that I'm willing to change, but I don't even know where to start. For those of you who mentioned having been through something similar, how did you make amends? Is it even possible to repair a relationship after so much damage has been done? How do you cope with the fear of losing someone you truly love, especially when you know it's your own fault? I'm open to any advice or insights you might have. Thank you again for all your support. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again, and I wanted to give you all an update because I know a lot of you weighed in on my situation and gave me some pretty harsh truths. First off, I want to say that I hear you. A lot of you blamed me for my actions, and you're right. I was at fault. I made some terrible mistakes, and I own up to them. I didn't handle things the way I should have, and I understand why so many of you were disappointed in me. You said I messed up by telling David he was overreacting, and looking back, I can see that was the nail in the coffin. I wish I had realized it sooner, but hindsight is 20/20, right? After receiving that message from David, I was overwhelmed. It was like a punch to the gut, and I spent several days just rereading it and letting it all sink in. Each time I went through it, I felt a new wave of guilt and regret. I realized just how much I had taken him for granted, and it tore me apart. Eventually, I knew I had to face this head on, so I reached out to David and asked if we could talk in person. Thankfully, he agreed and we set a date to meet up. We ended up meeting at his brother's house. I remember walking up to the door and feeling like my heart was in my throat. It was a mixture of dread and a tiny bit of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix things. But as soon as I saw him, I knew things were different. There was a heaviness between us, a weight that hadn't been there before. We sat down and had a very long conversation. It was the most honest and raw conversation we've ever had. There were tears, lots of them, from both of us. I apologized over and over, trying to convey just how sorry I was, how much I regretted everything. But David, he was calm, almost too calm, and that scared me. He told me he didn't want to come back to me. He didn't want us anymore. He said he wants a divorce. Hearing those words broke me. I felt like the ground was pulled out from under me. He explained that nothing I do now will ever make up for what I've done. He said he tried so hard to make things work. He waited for me to change, but I never did. And now it's too late. He said that ship has sailed, that it's left the shore, and there's no bringing it back. He apologized, and that's when I knew it was really over. We both cried a lot. I begged, I pleaded, but David remained firm. He said he can't forgive me no matter what, and I could see that he meant it. This wasn't a decision he made lightly. It was something he'd been thinking about for a long time, and now he was ready to move on without me. When I got home, I just broke down. I cried until I had no tears left. I felt, and still feel, completely heartbroken. This is the man I've spent so many years with, the man who loved me despite all my flaws, and now he's gone. I can't believe I let him slip away, all because I was too caught up in my own selfish pursuits. I prioritized things that don't matter over the one person who mattered most to me. So I guess that's it. We're getting a divorce and he's done with me for good. I don't know how to move forward from here. I feel like I've lost everything. I hate my life right now, and I'm struggling to come to terms with the fact that I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you to everyone who tried to get through to me earlier. I wish I had listened sooner. For those who are going through something similar, please don't take the people in your life for granted. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Hold on to the ones who love you, because once they're gone, there's no getting them back. I'm not sure what comes next for me, but I know I have to face it, one way or another. Thanks again for all the support. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. I know a lot of you have been messaging me, asking for an update, and I appreciate the concern more than I can put into words. Honestly, I didn't want to post again until I had something significant to share. I needed some time to process everything that's been happening, but here I am with an update, even though it's not exactly the kind of update I hoped I'd ever have to give. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone who reached out to me, whether it was to offer advice, share your own experiences, or just to check in on how I'm doing. I've received so many DMs, and I'm trying my best to reply to all of them. It's been overwhelming in both good and bad ways, but I promise I'll get through them eventually. Now, as for the actual update, I got served. A few days ago, I officially received the divorce papers, and that's pretty much it. There's no more ambiguity, no more hoping for a miracle or a change of heart. This is happening. We're getting divorced. Since David left, life has been moving at a snail's pace. Each day feels longer than the last. He still hasn't come back to the house, and it's just this empty, quiet space that feels too big for me now. It's funny how a place can feel so different when you're the only one in it. The house is in both of our names since we bought it together, so I guess we'll have to figure out what to do with it. Maybe we'll sell it, or maybe I'll try to buy him out. I don't even know if I can stand to live here anymore, to be honest. David barely talks to me now. I've tried reaching out a few times, but he's just distant. And who can blame him? I do check his social media, though, like some kind of masochist. He seems happier without me, and while that's what I want for him, it just makes me feel even more miserable. It's like watching someone walk away from a burning building. You're glad they're safe, but you're still standing in the flames, wondering how you let it get this bad. As for me, I'm completely miserable. There's no other way to put it. I don't have David here to do things for me anymore, to be there for me, and I feel that loss every single day. There's a difference between being lonely and being alone, and I never truly understood that until now. When David was here, I was lonely because I took him for granted, but at least he was still there, still trying. Now I'm alone, and the loneliness is suffocating. It's just me, bouncing between home and work, with nothing in between. No one waiting for me when I get home, no one to share the little moments with. Our friends, or rather our mutual friends, have tried reaching out to me. They've been supportive, but it's clear they're all on David's side. And honestly, I can't even blame them. They saw what I didn't, the way he struggled, the way he tried so hard to make things work while I just didn't. It's like they've all formed this protective circle around him, and I'm on the outside, looking in. I haven't felt like talking to any of them, so I've just isolated myself even more. It feels like a punishment I deserve, but it's also so lonely. So yeah, I got served. It's official. We're getting divorced, and there's no going back. I cry all the time now, which is ironic because I'm the one who set all of this in motion. I'm the one who pushed him away, who didn't see what I had until it was gone. And now, I'm just here, dealing with the consequences of my actions. I'm miserable, and there's nothing I can do to change it. This is my reality now. Damn. Update. Hello, Reddit. I still keep on getting requests for an update, and even though I don't have much to share, I'll just use here as a place to vent and as a soundboard. I keep on looking back figuratively. It's hard to understand how I let things get to this point. I know I made mistakes. I see that so clearly now, but knowing doesn't make it any easier. Every time I think about what David said, how he doesn't want to come back, how he's done with us, it feels like a knife in my chest. The worst part is knowing that no matter how much I regret what I did, I can't undo it. I can't go back and be the partner he deserved. I'm stuck in this loop of what ifs. What if I had just been more present? What if I hadn't dismissed his feelings? What if I had celebrated his achievements the way he always celebrated mine? Maybe then we wouldn't be here. Maybe then he'd still be mine. But it's too late for that now. The loneliness is the hardest part. I didn't realize how much I relied on David until he was gone. Not just for the big things, but for the little things too. His smile when I came home from work, the way he'd always ask about my day, even the way he'd tease me when I was being stubborn. All those moments are just memories now, and they hurt more than I can explain. I've tried to stay busy, to distract myself, but nothing really helps. Work doesn't feel the same. It used to be a refuge, a place where I could lose myself in tasks and deadlines, but now it just feels empty. Home doesn't feel like home anymore. It's just a house, filled with reminders of everything I lost. I think about moving, starting fresh somewhere new, but I don't even know if that would help. The problem isn't the place, it's me. David was my rock, and now that he's gone, I feel like I'm drifting. I'm trying to find my footing, trying to figure out who I am without him, but it's hard. It's so damn hard. I miss him every single day, and the thought of him moving on without me is almost unbearable. But I know I have to face it. I know I have to accept that this is the life I created for myself. So that's where I'm at. I wish I had something more hopeful to share, but this is my reality now. I'm just trying to take it one day at a time, to figure out what comes next. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I have to find a way to keep going, even if it feels impossible right now. Thank you again to everyone who has reached out, who has offered advice, or just a kind word. It means more to me than you know. I'll keep you all updated as I figure out what's next, but for now, I'm just trying to make it through each day. Update. Hey Reddit, it's me again. Just a mini update because I promised to keep you all posted until the divorce is finalized. Though, to be honest, I don't know why I'm updating today. I actually planned to do this tomorrow during my lunch break, but I really needed a place to vent, so here I am. So David came by today to pack the rest of his stuff, like literally today. He didn't come alone. he brought a couple of our mutual friends with him to help. Watching them carry out boxes and load up the truck felt like a punch to the gut, like I was watching the last pieces of my old life slip away. What made it worse was how David kept trying to check on me. Every few minutes, he'd ask how I was doing or if I was okay. I know he meant well, but honestly, it just made everything feel worse. It felt like he was trying to ease his own guilt or something, like he could somehow make this less painful by showing he still cared. But what's the point? It's not like I can have him anymore, so his concern just felt like salt in the wound. I ended up brushing him off, telling him to just get on with his packing. I know that probably hurt him, and I could see our friends glaring at me, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I'm hurt too. I'm miserable. I'm going through hell. And seeing him there, acting like he still cared, only reminded me of everything I've lost. Now the house feels even lonelier, if that's even possible. Before, at least some of his things were still around, like little remnants of the life we had. But now it's just me and the silence. Every room feels empty, and it's like I can't escape the reality that I brought this on myself. I pushed him away, and now he's really gone. So yeah, that's it. Nothing major to report, just another layer of sadness to add to the pile. I'm not sure what comes next. Maybe selling the house, maybe trying to figure out how to move forward. But right now, all I can feel is the weight of my own mistakes. I guess this is what happens when you take someone for granted. Thanks for listening, Reddit. I'll keep you all updated, but for now, I just needed to get this off my chest. Update. Hey Reddit, I promised myself not to update until after the divorce was finalized, and now that it has been, I owe you all at least one final update. The divorce process was pretty straightforward. David and I didn't have any debts to split. Our finances had been separate for a while before this. We'd only been married for 5 years, so there was no spousal support or alimony to consider. No kids meant no child support issues either. The main concern was the house. Initially, I thought about just selling the house and splitting the proceeds with David. The house was a painful reminder of everything that went wrong, and I figured moving on might be easier if I could just let it go. But as time passed, I came to realize something important. The house wasn't the problem. I was at fault, not the house. And if I sold it, I'd be losing the last physical connection I had to David. The house was like a symbol of our life together, and despite all the pain, it was also a part of my past with him that I wasn't ready to let go of. So, after a lot of reflection, I decided to buy David out. He agreed, and that was that. I'm still here, living in the house. It feels a bit like a double-edged sword. While it's a constant reminder of what went wrong, it's also the last piece of our life together that I have left. Now it's just me, trying to navigate life one day at a time. I felt like I owed you all this last update since you've been so supportive and helpful throughout this process. And so yeah, that's where things stand. Thanks for being there and for all your advice.